we know that the majority of initiatives that have been developed for SME disaster risk reduction and resilience in Africa are not well implemented. Most of the time, implementation activities are ineffective, and this is because we lack robust frameworks. Frameworks that can provide implementation and coordination support for the initiatives. And this is stated over and over again. Now, this factor again compounds the challenges of underinvestment in infrastructure, compromised business lifelines, inadequate risk capacity that render SMEs extremely vulnerable to disasters, and they are cascading their effects to the whole economy. We've had lots of research being churned out. We've all, have been reading about the impact of COVID-19 and how businesses have shut down, the impact of locusts, climate change, and other factors. So the growing awareness of these challenges and opportunities is a leading call to governments, to private sector, to SME ecosystem actors, development partners, for an informed and coordinated approach to accelerating efforts in building the resilience of SMEs to disasters in Africa that takes into account the multiple threats and the complexity of the risks. So today's session brings together a very rich and diverse audience, together with seasoned specialists who are going to enrich the discourse as we deliberate on the theme on investing in disaster risk for resilience. And our contribution today in this discourse is a critical and fundamental building block towards formulating and rolling out an SME resilience framework for action. That is what we want to champion together with Strathmore University Business School. But I would also like to acknowledge the other collaborators that have joined us today. And allow me to just mention the organizations that are collaborating with us also in this initiative. So we are joined by the Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs, ANDI, and the Kenya Private Sector Alliance, KEPSA, who are both working with us or collaborating to support us in advocacy and dissemination. We also have another group of critical stakeholders that are going to be enriching the dialogue, and specifically the Ministry of Industrialization, Trade and Enterprise Development. We'll be hearing from them. We are also joined by the United States International Development Finance Corporation, DFC. We've got the Financial Sector Deepening, FSD Kenya, and the Kenya Climate Innovation Center, last but not least. So you can see that there's an array of collaborators, of partners, and this is going to be a very enriching dialogue. So ladies and gentlemen, with those few remarks, I declare this session open. And my next assignment at this moment is to introduce us to our guest speaker, who will kick off the engagement today, who is none other than Dr. George Jenga. He is the Executive Dean of Strathmore Business School, and I can see him here, a Director of Strathmore Research and Consulting Company, a seasoned lecturer of many years. He holds different positions, he wears many hats, and he's quite a rich resource for this country. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome Dr. Jenga to address the session. So welcome, Dr. Jenga. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Wageshi. I'm very happy, and you have covered almost everything. Well done. Beautiful. And I want to thank you so much with all the work you're doing there in investing in Africa, Wageshi. And then Andea, DFC, KEPSA, KCIC, I see my colleague there significantly, Bwana Mungai. Dr. Mungai. Let me not call him Bwana Mungai anymore. Now he's Dr. Mungai. And I'll give a few remarks surrounding and effectively strengthening what our partners, the Investing in Africa Institute under Wangeshi, is doing. The first issue is financing or investing in order to help the disaster-stricken SME sector, for it comprises more than 90% of the entrepreneurship levels, entrepreneurship's capacity here in Africa, by and large, more than 90%. If you count that the average age of African people is around 19, then that can also tell you that the largest proportion of this SME sector is actually micro sector, because those are the startups. They're the startups, they're the simple agricultural organizations on the ground, and so on and so forth. Large companies are a difficult issue in Africa because they're important and they have ecosystems to help them sustain during disasters most of the time. They have legal frameworks that enable them to access solutions for disaster preparedness. They can renegotiate their loans and so on and so forth. Whereas our SME ecosystem does not. In fact, we do not have an ecosystem in Africa for SMEs, though they are the largest. And incidentally, when we say SMEs, small and medium enterprises, or if you want to add micro, small and medium enterprises, we have to be very careful, because I've noticed since we started doing research under the Presidential Delivery Unit SME department, who we partner with for the Presidential SME Roundtable, we have discovered that under the word MSME or MSER are informal businesses that make much more money than what we may call large businesses here in Kenya. And I would say that too for South Africa, for Egypt, for Uganda as well, since I have been giving quite a number of sessions there on the SME sector. And for Tanzania, I wouldn't say this statement is applicable, but it is actually coming, that there are those who we call micro and small, and we add the name informal in order for it to be clear they are SMEs or MSMEs. But when you look at their businesses, they are in the middle and larger group of business from the point of view of income. So we don't have an ecosystem. And therefore, resilience to disaster or disaster management is irrelevant to them. They survive whether or not whether or not the government cares. They find their own means. Problem with that is that after COVID, it was very clear that there are certain people within this sector who are not resilient because of the ecosystem. So probably when we're investing in our disaster preparedness for small, medium enterprises, the first thing we should think is ecosystem. There are words that go with an ecosystem. For instance, do we have a particular institution within the Ministry of Industry and Trade on that? Yes. Do we have a department that should be solving those problems? Yes. Do we have a private sector that should be looking, a private sector association that should be looking at this? Yes, we do. Do we have a recipient, a demand platform from the SMEs? Very few, and very disparate, and very disintegrated. Policy-wise, disintegrated. And therefore, it's very difficult to reach the last mile. So this is a place where we have to invest in. SME network of networks. The other thing that becomes very evident from the SME network of networks is formal skills and capacity for productivity. That is a very big issue, and that is why we partner with IIA in a big way, because I think the more we formalize the skills on the ground, the better. What do I mean by formalization? What I mean is that very frequently formal organizations recognize formal capability. Do you have a diploma? Do you have a degree? Do you have a certificate? And the fact is that these people know what they are doing, but they are not formalized, all right? There are processes and process strategies of financing. So another area here is very clearly, how do we finance SME without a proper ecosystem? And the problem is that that brings about a very high cost of doing business. And I can tell you that from my own personal experience in the SMEs I've invested in. The cost of either capital, equity, or working capital is unsustainable. So how do we solve this question with government with the main aim of incentivizing startups and incentivizing good SMEs that are strategic, and because they give most of the employment? The last thing is, I'm going to put across here, Wageshi, if you will allow me, is that I also suddenly discovered that since I'm the executive dean of a business school, I have to be a business school that is community-based. And I say this with all due respect to the business schools and the concept of business school in the world globally. What I discovered is if 80 to 90% of the people and population are in the villages, are in the rural areas, how do I serve them as a business school? I can't be serving this top cream of 10% and calling myself a business school, a la excellence. But I am measured by how many papers I do research in, how much I publish, and how many graduates I have who take top tier leadership in large corporations. That's how I'm measured for my business school activity. But now, the more I think about it, the more I think that institutions like Strathmore Business School, University of Nairobi Business School, have to be community-based business schools. In other words, how do we look at the community-based business system in Africa? It is different. And the more I look at the way and the culture of doing business, the more I realize that if I try to formalize the informal, I may be doing a disservice because I'm going to try and change cultures, because I'm going to try and change the standard social security system that is provided by these community-based entrepreneurship systems, because I am going to break families. And that is making me feel probably there is the unreasonableness of thinking, why don't we informalize the formal? Because if the majority of people are somehow surviving on an informal sector, why am I making them formal? Why am I removing the community-based family business systems? Why am I removing the locally based solutions from them in order for me to make them look more urban? Why am I trying to register their companies when their own family members know who they are and their identity? And there are very many other things that sometimes are negative, but many times positive of this business-based SME community system. And so this year, we have decided together with other partners, and especially on co-creative business we are doing with KEPSA and Kenya Youth Alliance and Child Fund and USAID in a very special way, we are designing new systems of business development centers at the local level, at the county level. And in these business centers, we have seen that we have to invest in a number of partners. The first one is the private sector, so people like KEPSA, people like the SME, MCA, and so on. And the second one is institutions of learning. And the third one is civil society organizations that understand the systems on the ground and understand the risk and the fragile business associated with family structures and village and political structures. We have to get funders, because much of this work will not be income bearing, but rather it will be structuring a system that can be funded for the good of a resilient food security or resilient business or resilient employment, rather than a disaster situation that results in unrest, whether political, economic, or family based. With these few remarks, Wageshi, I know we really need to find solutions to this, and I don't think that I am going to proffer a perfect solution. But I think the more we recognize the problems and the environment we are facing, the more we will come closer to solving investment and financing of these small, medium enterprises and micro enterprise. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jenga, for that very passionate address and quite informed, and much of what you have said, and we really privileged to be in partnership with Strathmore University Business School. We will be hearing more ahead as our moderator for the day has debriefed us from different faculty members from the Strathmore University this afternoon. And so allow me, ladies and gentlemen, to move into the next session and just announce that our keynote speaker, Ms. Margareta, who was addressing this forum today as our keynote speaker, is not able to join due to some unexpected emergency that has arisen. She will not be joining us, and therefore would like to really apologize for that, and straight away move into the next session, where we will be addressed by a guest speaker from the U.S., United States International Development Finance Corporation, and just state that this is a very important partner for Invest in Africa, DFC, and also for this particular dialogue session, because of the work that they have been doing and the work that they are doing. There's a lot of insights and best practices that we can learn from DFC. And those of us who joined the first dialogue series may be aware that one of our panelists was from DFC, and they were able to showcase work that they've done across this area of investing in disaster risk. And so we are joined this afternoon by Jacob Felewelling, who is from DFC. And Jacob is a very experienced expert within the area. He's worked across different countries. He is the Africa Investment Advisor to the DFC, a role that he's been playing for some time. And so, ladies and gentlemen, just allow me to invite Jacob to come and address us. As I said, he'll be sharing with us insights and best practice from their work, and I know that he'll be stepping out after 3 p.m. and that's why we brought him to come in earlier, so that we have time to engage with him. And this is your moment, Jacob. Just welcome on board. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Wangeki, and good afternoon to everyone. Very pleased to be part of this forum. So as Wangeki indicated, my name is Jacob Flewelling. I'm part of a team of 6 in Sub-Saharan Africa tasked with sourcing as well as pre-screening transactions for the DFC. It's actually a new function that the DFC has just in the last 6 months or so in the interest of extending the number of projects that it's able to support in Sub-Saharan Africa. In the event that you're wondering, I'm actually the only non-African who is part of that particular team. Just a brief background with regards to the DFC, the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation is America's development bank and has formally been in existence only since January of last year after the incorporation of the old Development Credit Authority of USAID into what was DFC's predecessor agency, OPIC, as many of you probably know. DFC offers debt financing, political risk insurance, direct equity and funding for investment funds, credit guarantees, as well as a new product, technical assistance, partnering with the private sector to finance solutions to the most critical challenges in the developing world. One major difference from what was OPIC is that the so-called US nexus requirement, for example, US equity going into the project company, it's now merely a preference as opposed to being a requirement for the DFC. DFC invests in across sectors, including energy, healthcare, critical infrastructure, and technology. What I thought might be helpful for this audience is to highlight some of the key transactions that the DFC has recently supported involving SMEs in Africa and beyond that are facing disaster risks and that have demonstrated themselves to be resilient. It's possible that Iman may have covered a little bit of this, but I wanted to go over this material as well. So one example that's often cited is a direct equity investment into Kasha Global, which is an e-commerce company that directly sells women's personal care, health, beauty, and sanitary products to low-income as well as middle-income customers in rural and urban locations in Kenya as well as Rwanda via an online platform. The company helps to overcome the strong social stigma that's associated with the purchase and use of women's health and sanitary products. Kasha's operations underscore how the disruption in traditional supply chains from the pandemic has resulted in kind of a rethinking and digitalization of Africa's supply chains. Another example, and this one is from South Africa's SA Taxi, where DFC has actually supported them a couple of times, most recently through a $150 million loan. SA Taxi is, as certainly any of you who live in Johannesburg or elsewhere in South Africa are probably familiar, is a company that provides vehicle financing to entrepreneurs operating minibuses or minibus taxis in South Africa. And this loan was part of DFC's rapid response liquidity facility that was launched shortly after the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. The third one is financing to the Medical Credit Fund, which has enabled the provision of loans to many clinics in Ghana, as well as Kenya, Nigeria, Tanzania, and Uganda, so that each of them can provide higher level of care to a greater number of patients. The Medical Credit Fund has also provided loans to manufacturers and distributors of supplies such as face masks, eye protection, gloves, gowns, and hand sanitizers. Fourth, a company by the name of Demaji, which is actually a small business located in Massachusetts. It in turn, through DFC financing, is supporting healthcare workers in South Africa with its open source mobile data management platform that facilitates data intake, patient monitoring, and COVID-19 contact tracing. That company's technology allows healthcare workers to input data on individual patients, track their symptoms, and healthcare visits, as well as flag areas of concern. Then we have a framework agreement with Citibank, which is helping a New York-based company, Gradient Health Systems, to design, distribute, and maintain medical equipment made for low-resource environments in Benin, Kenya, Nigeria, Tanzania, Uganda, and Zambia. Gradian makes mechanical ventilators and anesthesia machines that are specifically designed for safe and effective use in challenging settings that have limited access to electricity and medical oxygen. The equipment is built with long-duration batteries and is designed to be operated and to function in high heat, humidity, and dust environments. In addition, one example of technical development / technical assistance, which is a new tool for DFC. This one is actually outside of Africa, but seems worthwhile sharing in this setting. It's a company by the name of One Breath. And so in this case, DFC is providing technical development, sharing the cost of development work needed for One Breath to obtain required approvals of a low-cost portable ventilator, particularly well suited for rural critical settings in India, and then subsequently other low and middle income countries, and thus prepare One Breath for purposes of DFC financing. I also wanted to highlight on a high-level basis a couple of SME transactions that are currently in the works, of course, without stating the names of the clients, etc. One is a loan to an insurance syndicate to facilitate a cost-effective insurance policy for the shipment of vaccines and medical products to developing countries, including in Africa. The other is a loan to a healthcare company in Africa that provides high-quality, life-saving dialysis at an affordable cost. So my intent here was to give you a sense of the sorts of SME transactions that the DFC tends to support. In the event that any of you or your business partners are involved in any such projects that would meet our funding criteria, feel free to get in touch with me as a first point of entry into the DFC. That's my role, as well as my 5 colleagues who are all spread out in other parts of the continent. In the event that there's time, Wangeki, I'm happy to entertain a few questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Wangeshi. Thank you so much, Dr. Jenga. And thank you very much, Jacob Flewilling. In terms of the questions, we will be so honored to have you take some questions. What we will do for the sake of time is have those questions put in our parking lot, in our chat, and that will be then channeled to you. If I may, Wangeshi, we can then tackle those questions in the Ask the Expert session that will be scheduled on 3rd of February for the sake of time. Before we move on to the next sector, I just wanted to capture one thing coming from the remarks made by Dr. Jenga and from Mr. Flewilling. Dr. Jenga, just on the issue of innovation, thank you so much for sharing the issue of creation of business centers. Indeed, our topic today is about investing in disaster risk for resilience, and that indeed is also including getting drivers of innovation, and business centers definitely are ways where we can have hubs of either knowledge or either learning and education. So that is so good to hear, and we definitely look forward to engaging further on that. Mr. Flewilling, we are definitely happy to see some of the moves towards importance of financing that will lead to the resilience of SMEs. I am certain that many of the partners who are on the call today have listened to your call about identifying possibilities on engaging further to get financing. We do know about the limitations that we have in terms of financing, but that we know it's also important that it's one of the really non-structural measures that we would need if we are going to result in building resilient SMEs. So I just wanted to touch on that before we move to our next segment. Let me start with Dr. Njoki Mwarumba. Njoki, learning and education have a pivotal role to play in building the resilience of SMEs. How do we incorporate industry practice with the program design of education and capacity programs of SMEs? Over to you, Dr. Mwarumba.
Thank you very much, Mudhoni. And I take this opportunity to wish you all a very happy new year. This is indeed quite a profound wish given what we have just gone through in 2020. So we have made it so far. We have been fairly resilient. And we do count on continuing with that resilience. And thank you very much also for the opportunity to share in this esteemed conversation. And the question that I've been asked to address has to do with resilience and SME resilience, and with specifically with regard to learning and education, which is, as Muthoni has very aptly put, what my area is. I am currently a scholar. I have been a scholar, and I'm currently a professor of disaster management at the University of Nebraska, Omaha. And I have also recently joined the Strathmore Business School in the same capacity, where I will be supporting endeavors such as this one. So learning and education are near and dear to me, okay? And what I do bring and what I offer to you as a group that has assembled to address this issue is offered in humility, understanding that the challenge ahead of us is extremely complex. And anybody coming at it with the assumption or a provision that sounds simplistic is not quite fully expressing and understanding all the different challenges that exist in this field. So today, I would like for us to just step back for a little bit, right? And understand some of the very fundamental challenges that we are faced with when it comes to learning and education. For the most part, the conversation tends to begin with what we are offering post-secondary school. I would like to posit to us as a group that part of the multi-sectoral approach that is absolutely pivotal for us addressing issues around mainstreaming disaster thinking, understanding that disasters are not strange alien events, but there are events, they are hazard events that have existed and preceded our ancestors. They lived with them, they developed resiliences, and they survived, right? We need to move away and begin to slowly shift from thinking that is advised by phrases such as, oh, it was God's will, it was bound to happen, it was inadvertent, okay? It is Mother Nature. Because when we do that, when we address our thinking, our frameworks of thought, right, there then will go our actions. It features quite distinctly and quite well with how it is that SMEs should think about, and not just SMEs, but essentially how we should address the idea about business continuity, ensuring that we have business continuity whenever we are impacted by disasters. So the first thing that you have to think about is, how do you continue with operations? How do you recalibrate, right? And then number two, rapid restoration of business functions, which we can see is quite necessary, and rapid is actually relative to what the impact of the disaster was and the extent of the damage. In this case, we have been able to evaluate one way in which this can happen. And for some of the businesses, the startups, the home-based businesses, and businesses that are very heavily dependent on internet systems, which whether it's internet on a desktop or on your phone, we know that what just happened, cyber attacks, which are deliberate or inadvertent events like the one that just happened, can happen. So making sure you have a plan for your data. What's your data? Where is it? Is it backed up? But going back to the point that I had started talking about, was I had invited us to actually step back and understand that the ways in which we frame, the ways in which we discuss, the ways in which we perceive disasters needs to be mainstreamed. Because when we do mainstream disasters, then we are able to establish some sense of sustainability. The way I perceive this, and the way disaster literature has put this across to us, is that we have seen that for the most part, people tend to distance themselves from disasters as one-offs, as events, that hazard events that are rare, are meant to be penalties, are and the language that is used, I was referencing, was, it is Mother Nature that has done this. It's an act of God, right? Or we have also thinking that heavily relies on technology or science alone, right? But the thinking that we are we need for a sustainable approach is one that understands and processes disasters from a systems theory perspective. A systems theory perspective posits that, yes, there is a role that is played by the natural hazards, the mother natures, the act of God, and that, yes, science has a role, technology has a role, but like if you were to perceive a three-legged stool, there's three components to how disasters are conceptualized. There is the role of the human being. We have a role, and we see that especially in the dialogue around climate change and hazard events that are related to climate change. There is the role of the individual, there is the role of the built environment, and there is the role of nature. So independently, none of those three systems can create a disaster. However, when you have an imbalance created by an overburdening of one system, then you have very high risk. Therefore, we need to understand that we as humans do contribute, do have a role to play, right, in the disaster cycle management, which is we can mitigate, we can prepare for, respond, and recover from disasters actively. We are not passive, okay? And the focus should be in engaging in a disaster cycle approach. The history that we also have had is one that we have viewed disasters mainly from a response perspective, so that the conversation tends to be around how do we respond, how do we prepare? And then those two concepts tend to be very short term. We need to look at it from a more holistic approach that considers that not only is there preparedness and response, but there's the component of recovery and mitigation, which is long-term thinking, long-term investment, which is what this conversation today is about when we're talking about building resilience. So what is the role of education? The role of education is not only the forte of higher learning, but should be something that long-term is invested and vested in, and in helping students in lower levels of learning also understand and incorporate this kind of thinking as well, so that when they come up, and we know that the young people are the demographic that is largest in as far as engagement in SMEs, whether as vendors, whether as consumers, or as startup producers, so that they already have that input, they have that wiring to understand that we can mainstream and live with disasters, and that we have historically been able to survive and build a resilience. So the engagement needs to be broad when it comes to engage to the education and learning processes. The next point I'd like to touch on briefly is the toolbox approach, understanding that one size does not fit all. So we need to measure and make assessments for what it is our businesses are and what those needs are, and then tailor our toolbox approach based on what our needs are, okay? And then I would also like to talk about data, okay? Decision-making that is data-based. Currently, we are going through a pandemic, and the opportunity that we have for gathering data, which we can use for future outbreaks, but also more importantly, to evaluate the ways in which we responded as an SME across the board in the agriculture sector, tourism, home-based startups, looking to see and increase and enhance and amplify the value of data is central to how we need to approach disasters and resilience. And that is the role of education and learning. And it is a role that is ongoing, it is evolving, right? And it's also reiterative, meaning going back to have an after action report to determine, okay, this is where we're at, what else do we need? What else do we need to incorporate in our thinking right? And then also understanding that when we develop plans based on the data that we have, we should not keep them on the file for for them to gather dust, but rather the very important task of actually implementing and tasking, okay, and testing these plans is very central to the survival of businesses in disaster. Disaster literature actually bears that out, that businesses that have actually had practice runs, functional exercises of trying to see how they would respond in a disaster have a better chance of surviving impact than those that do not. Okay, so the role of academia is one which has historically been very ivory tower, very removed from the mashinani, the proverbial mashinani, the proverbial small scale person, but the proverbial community that Dr. Jenga actually touched on. So whenever you have that kind of siloed approach, then there's no relevance for what it is we are generating in our institutions, right? But when the community actually understands the connection and the bridge between academia and the businesses, in this case SMEs, then the relationship has, you know, is fortified and is more robust, and the chances therefore of generating collective collaborative data that can then be implemented is significantly improved. So I will take a break there, and as with that having been a quick summary of the points that I would like to share on the role of education and learning, and keep in mind that a central point here is that there needs to be an accountability with the people who are the consumers of data and the people who are actually generating data. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Njoki, and that has really, that already sets the scene for our second panelist, and particularly around the area of how decision-making should be data-based. I have the great pleasure then of having Stephen Odua, who is from the Ministry of Trade, Industrialization and Enterprise in Kenya. And Stephen, governments have the overall responsibility for reducing disaster risk, and they share this obligation with non-state stakeholders. How is risk managed as a strategic function in the public sector, and particularly in informing policy and public planning? For the sake of time, of course, you try and be brief as much as you can, but over to you, Steve.
Thank you very much, Mudhoni. I want to start by thanking the organizers for giving us this opportunity as government to be able then to come and share what we also do from our end. I know in the past, or has been continuously been said, probably not much is seen in terms of what initiatives government is doing. But I want to say that we have been undertaking several programs to try and address aspects of risk management. As a starting point, we have a complete disaster risk unit under the Office of the President. But that one looks at broader issues that deal or relate with disasters, major disasters. However, coming closer home to the SME sector, we have actually in the process of printing the revised Kenya Micro and Small Enterprise Policy. Yeah, the policy, unlike the others, has a specific chapter this time round that will deal with aspects of risk management, especially with regard to the SMEs. This particular policy also, unlike others you've been trying to develop in the past, also has an implementation matrix, again, to address some of those aspects. And in particular, we are looking at two key intervention areas within that policy framework. One being that we'll be able then, as part of an ongoing risk profiling and addressing issues of risk management with the SMEs, address or develop an effective risk mitigation, adaptations, and coping mechanisms against the hazards posing shocks to MSMEs. One of the critical approaches in this particular intervention area is that we want, together with the MSEs, and this we'll also be doing very frequently through engagements. And I want to thank Dr. Jenga for specifically spearheading. We have been doing, as a ministry, private sector dialogue, especially with KEPSA and CAM and chambers, with regard to addressing overall the business environment. But like we are all aware, the SME Roundtable has since also been incorporated. And through there, we have seen so many other initiatives or so many other measures that have been put in place to try and address aspects of MSEs. As a ministry, of course, SMEs cut across various sectors. We have been charged with the responsibility in government to try and support SME development, and in particular, to support us in that, in implementing this particular mandate, we have the Micro and Small Enterprise Authority, which is like a one-stop shop for many of the SMEs or MSMEs issues that are currently ongoing within the country. So MSEA, as had already been alluded to earlier on by our one of our key note speakers, has been one major issue that they're going to be addressing is like registration of associations. MSMEs, like we have had earlier, have a challenge of being fragmented. But in terms of a specific mandate and policy direction, that is already been is being looked at with regard to having a home for SMEs in addressing a lot of their challenges. Through there, we'd hope then we could be able to build on a network of networks in terms of SMEs through those associations. We can then be able to now build a broader network that now would be able to address a lot of those issues of SMEs right into the grassroots, as has been mentioned also. The other thing we're trying to do, besides what is being done by our sister ministry, that is Ministry of Youth, as a ministry in charge of development of business in the country, we are also coming up with what is called Biashara Centers. Biashara Centers basically would help in trying to support in terms of bridging the gap of information and also bringing key regulatory institutions that directly impact on the MSMEs, especially at national level, within concentrated or coordinated or a one-stop shop, to be able then to address various aspects that would relate to the businesses. So that will be a good avenue also to try and look at what are the risks that are inherent within the SMEs, and how then can we build and develop that, and also develop and roll out capacity building programs on risk management and disaster preparedness for SMEs. I think COVID-19 has been a big wake-up call globally for all of us, and in particular for us in government. We see that there's, of course, a very important component now to ensure that this is factored in all our planning documents a bit more rigorously. It has been there, but now a bit more rigorously. And this new policy is one way of addressing that. We'll be able, through these interventions of the new policy, to hold regular policy dialogues on development of the SMEs, both at the county and the national levels. I think there's that we want to look at it more as a more integrated approach, and we'll use the existing government machinery within the entire country to help and support that. We're also trying to use now a one government approach in a lot of our initiatives. And of course, the Huduma centers and the one-stop center in the Kenya Investment Authority is one way or evidence that we are trying to look at making it much, much easier, and especially for SMEs to do business. The ease of doing business initiatives or reforms, which has helped us improve on our ranking from number 136 in 2017 to position 56 last year, has also helped in trying to refocus and trying to mitigate what are these operational challenges that could affect SMEs in one way or the other. So that is already in place. Like most of you may be aware, government recently launched, again, in partnership with the private sector, the credit guarantee scheme, which is also trying to help SMEs, especially on assessing credit, which has been a big challenge because of risk profiling for SMEs. So that, again, we try and use that as mitigation measures to address the challenges that are happening there. The MSC policy had defined what the micro and the small enterprise is, but with a recent revision of the Public Finance Management Act, we are also seeing how we can also define the missing middle, that is the middle enterprises. And we hope through those initiatives that will also help us mitigate it. As a ministry also, specifically in response to COVID, we have been spearheading the Business Response Center, which is basically comprising of both public, private, and even the civil society, specifically in trying to see what are these measures that you can put in place to address at that moment in time was ensure business continuity. This is where passes were being given for the essential services. This is where we are coming up with protocols for businesses to open post-COVID or during the COVID period. And we're also looking at this now as a feature that we can also bring as a more permanent structure to be able then to address some of the challenges that are quite emerging or volatile within the business sector. So that within the COVID and probably post-COVID, we could see what immediate interventions we can put in place. And it was also very instrumental to the 8-point agenda, in drafting the 8-point agenda that the president read during the period of COVID. So in short, I just want to say that, yes, indeed, we have put in place various measures that would affect various facets of the SMEs. But in terms of policy, now this is already been structured, that aspects of risk management and especially building resilience for the SMEs will be something that we'll be doing moving forward. As a new and emerging segment coming in, the innovative startup that is increasingly becoming the new aspect of SMEs within the economy. We are, as a ministry, are trying to see how we could, again, in partnership with the private sector, and enhance productivity and competitiveness through strengthening the innovation ecosystem. And we have a project that you are running with support from the World Bank called the Kenya Industry and Entrepreneurship Project that has various aspects relating to addressing that particular segment of the SMEs, the innovative startups. Here, we want to see how we can strengthen the intermediaries, which include the iHubs, the incubators, the accelerators. We want to see, again, through bootcamps training, how we can engage aspects of education that we have learned about and bring in as one of the key business areas when you're looking at your business plan, aspects of risk management and mitigation, and also see how we can create linkages between the industry and the startups. We can also create linkages between the industry and academia. We are also seeing how the ecosystem that is slowly evolving can be able to be exposed to regional and global arena through the international acceleration process, which is one of the components within that project, and also particularly enhance linkages between SMEs with an aim of upgrading them. And that is the SME Linkages and Upgrading Program, which we launched during the African Industrialization Day, 20th November last year. And we are now basically in the process of fine-tuning the first cohort in terms of implementation. So there are various initiatives putting in place, but like, straight to the point we are discussing here, measures are now being put, especially through policy frameworks, to be able to mitigate those risks. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Indeed, if time was on our side, this would have definitely generated a lot of discussion around the partnership, because where else would you be able to, as the government, put this in place, put the ecosystem in place, than here in this discussion today with all the IIA partners and the different stakeholders who are here. I am still looking for time, and I kindly request that we move on with our segment and ask Dr. Mungai to come in with his intervention. Dr. Mungai, we know that with climate change, occurrence and extent of impact of environmental emergencies are growing. So, and do we consider the COVID-19 pandemic period a lesson contribution on emergency and disaster risk management? And if so, how are we going to integrate the lessons into our research and professional curriculum, and also into our development planning process? Over to you, Dr. Mungai.
Thanks, Muthoni, and thanks, Wangeshi, for the opportunity. I think that's a very loaded question, and I must say that I'll try as much as possible to see if I can be able to tackle it. And I look at it from two perspectives. One is, what lessons have we learned by being in the COVID situation? But I think more importantly, the second part of the question is looking at what could we have done now that COVID is here, or a disaster was there, and what is it that we could have done as organizations, as part of the ecosystem which is supporting enterprises to be able to grow. But let me first focus in terms of what are the key lessons we have taken away from COVID, and which then can be replicated in any disaster, including dealing with climate change. I think the first and the most important thing that we saw, and we are seeing already when we are in this disaster, is that data, transparency, and communication have become very important. And in any disaster, it is very important that on real-time basis, that data is churned out, that people are transparent on exactly what is going on. And at the same time, that should be done in a very effective way in terms of communication. What that does is that it helps us to know where are we in this crisis. May it be the climate change crisis, may it be the COVID crisis, may it be any crisis that we are facing, and including the crisis that we are in, where we as the panel, we are getting communication and we are getting message of what is going on. And that is a kind of an example of how then that data plays a role. The second thing is about the collaboration that we have seen. Clearly, partnership will emerge as the new model, as the new norm, as we try to build forward better. And truly, having private sector, public sector coming together to be able to champion and to be able to move us as human beings to the next level and away from the disaster, that will obviously be very critical. Of course, awareness creation and telling the story and sensitizing people, that also is very helpful. And we've seen different government in different locations embracing this issue of awareness creation and putting all this kind of communication that is really helping. And again, this is something that we must take in all disasters. It's something that, especially also on climate change, where we must be able to champion the awareness creation, just to tell what is the effect of this and what it means to us, and what mechanism are we going to put in place. The fourth thing, and actually very important for me, is that we've seen for the first time, well, should I say the first time, but at least we have seen a very strong, interlinkage of science and politics. You know, this is something that we haven't seen before in disaster management, where people in politics, politicians are listening to scientists. Definitely COVID-19 was a good case where we saw clearly that government and politics and science was really put together. And indeed, this is something that we also need to put in climate change and see how that can be able to be moved. Of course, the fifth lesson, which also we've seen and which probably we've ignored sometimes back, is that human beings are an incredible machine. You know, we are resilient, and we can be able to move to the next steps if provided these other four things that I was talking about are in place, and therefore we can be able to survive. But I think more importantly now is really looking into the discussion about the if we are to build resilience within our organization, and especially for small and medium enterprises, what are these things that we need to put in place? You know, it goes back to the basics, and these basics is what we call common sense, but common sense is never common sense. And things like leadership, within our organization, that needs real transformation, and people need to start questioning, and that leadership need to start giving us what we call the blue ocean kind of strategic perspectives, because these are some of the things which will help us to get into the disaster and be able to survive. And again, I think it is Steve who was talking about innovation and how we can use innovation to kind of leverage and move to the next level. And this innovation and really research and development also plays a very critical role that we must be able to embed it within our organization, so that then the things that we are coming up with are obviously kind of foreseeing what might be into the future. And I can tell you, I mean, it's not possible to foresee what will happen into the future. But if we have the right leadership, we are listening to the market, we have some insights, and we are putting in innovation, we are having good leadership within our organization, for sure we can be able to push through. You talked about sustainability, and I think that's the third point that I think we need also to embed within our organization. I want to call it shared value. We need to get to a point where we are looking at our business systems and we are saying it's not just about profit, it's also about other benefits and what value can we be able to share to our communities. And the moment we push it away from profit or economic issues, we go to social issues and we go to environmental issues, then we start embedding new things that will help us to kind of forecast the future and help us to listen more to our stakeholders and hopefully be able to get us to the next level. Then, of course, government, and Stephen, thanks for being here. Government must provide us with an enabling environment. And the work of government leader is not to engage and roll their sleeves. Their work is to provide us with that enabling environment. I mean, I like the idea of this doing business. We've improved to number 56. And again, that's about enabling environment, and also partnership are tied up to that. And I talked about partnership. And I'm also, James is here, and really I'm also thinking about financial innovations as the fifth thing that is very critical for us to be able to move into the next level, and for these SMEs to be able to build that resiliency. And this financing, it doesn't need to be the plain vanilla. It's not the old financing that we know. It must be innovative in terms of the duration. It must be long-term view. It must also have some, in terms of structuring, in terms of the costing of it, there must be some ways that we can be innovative. And I also felt that I needed to share a story here which really incorporate all this. And I saw it, and I'm a little bit selfish here, and I'm saying this because I'm giving an example of Strathmore University. 7 years ago, the university decided that it was going to give each and every student a laptop, and these have been very deliberate. The first day you come to the university, the first thing you get is actually a laptop. And you would say that's about leadership, it's about innovation, it's also about shared value, where you are giving a benefit to the student, a benefit that they could probably not have had, and also partnership with people like IBM, Lenovo, and all those to be able to provide this, and also financing mechanism on how you finance that computer. But what eventually happened is that, COVID came, and therefore, each and every student of Strathmore University had a computer. And in day 3 of COVID, almost everybody was doing virtual learning because they did have computers, they did have gadgets. Whereas when you look at other universities, they were struggling in terms of trying to figure out how they manage that. But Strathmore knew that this was going to happen. Well, didn't know that it was going to happen, but they had equipped, and this forward-looking, forward conversation is what we are looking within SMEs, within large organizations. And day 3, they were able to partner with the Zoom, they were able to partner with Safaricom, and eventually in day 3, they had trained the lecturers, and in the first 1 week, after 1 week, they were able to provide, lessons through Zoom. And that is resiliency. It's not that they knew that COVID was coming, but because of this thing, leadership, innovation, shared value, partnerships, and financial innovation, they were able to probably survive as far as that was concerned. Well, those are my submission, and I hope that we can be able to continue this conversation and to help SMEs to build this resilience within their organization, and hopefully we can be able to tackle disasters, including that one of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mungai. Indeed, the conversation has just started, and we will be able to have an opportunity to continue supporting the resilience of SMEs. Keywords: innovation, shared value, leadership, financial innovation, and partnership as a new normal. That takes us very well into our last panel member, Katuchi Kasandi, who is going to give us examples from her work, because sharing of best practices is actually very important as we move forward with supporting SMEs. And she is going to give us examples from her work where with the entrepreneurial ecosystems, where they have actually had disaster risk reduction measures deployed by SME support organizations in East Africa. Over to you, Katuchi, for the next 6 minutes.
So thank you so much, Modwani, and thank you to all the panelists that came before. I've also gotten to learn a couple of things, including the new policy that defines missing middle. So for those that haven't interacted with ANDI is a global network of member organizations, and each and every member within the ANDI network support entrepreneurs by either providing financial support, educational support, or capacity development to the small and growing businesses. So for us then, our model is, as much as we're doing entrepreneurial ecosystem building work, we are not working with the entrepreneur directly, but we are working with organizations, for example, like Invest in Africa, KCIC, that are directly working with the entrepreneurs. And as Andy, the services that we offer to the ecosystem include training and talent development, advocacy, funding opportunities, knowledge sharing, and networking platforms, research, amongst others. When we think about disasters that have recently happened, like for us, the one place that we can go to immediately is COVID, similarly to everyone else in the call. And to us as a network, the 3 main things that we were doing at the time were largely around ensuring that everyone in the network had the information that they needed to have in order to know how to best support support small and medium-sized or small and growing businesses' needs and the risks that they were facing. And we were doing this by consistently not only just doing initial set of research, but consistently updating that research so that as the situation is shifting, our members and other key stakeholders within the entrepreneurial ecosystem had the data that they needed to have to make decisions in terms of how to best support businesses. Over and above that, there were other global networks that were also starting to support entrepreneurs, and for us, we went ahead to partner with them. And some notable ones were, for example, like the COVID Response Alliance for Social Entrepreneurs. We joined that network, and at this point in time, we were not interested in looking at each other as competitors. We were more interested in seeing how can we best coordinate to ensure that resources are being disseminated to social entrepreneurs that are marginalized, and they actually are the most in need, given looking at the kind of resources that were available by these networks. And lastly, in relation to like just the overall network building work for us was also to provide a platform for our different members that were also going through the COVID situation to come together and share how are they adapting, what lessons are they learning from the process, so that if you're in that space and you're much lower in the value chain, you do not have to reinvent the wheel, rather you build on the lessons that someone else has and you move on. So in terms of some of the best practices that we saw emerge from our members, one of them was around diversification. And diversification, you can look at it from different angles. The first one was around business models. So for a very long time, I think one of the things that as a network, I feel like it's celebrated a lot is entities or practitioners that are able to have a paying customer for their product. But what COVID taught us is a lot of like some of those Andy members that, for example, offer training and had like over 80 or 90% of their budget covered through, for example, entrepreneurs participating in training and paying to participate in that training, they were at risk. You need to think about how do you diversify your income so that it's not like a huge percentage of your budget that is largely dependent on one piece. So for those ones that had, for example, they have consulting practice, they do have a model that entrepreneurs pay to be a part of their program, they have grant funding within their portfolio. A lot of those who are able to quickly adapt and really continue with their operations as they had reserves that would allow them to do this. Over and beyond that, also diversification in terms of the program structures. If you have a program structure, for example, if you are a training program and a lot of your program is centered around running, for example, in-person cohort-based model trainings for entrepreneurs, the way a lot of previous panelists have mentioned, when COVID came, it was impossible for us to interact in person and continue those kinds of programs. And therefore, there was a general need for a lot of these businesses to transition. And as we all know that transitioning your content from in-person to virtual is not something that it happens overnight. So for those ones that had different models where, for example, they had cohort-based models for entrepreneurs, one-on-one consulting for entrepreneurs, it was really easy for them to focus on one part. So for example, checking your one-on-one consulting that can easily be customized based on entrepreneurs' needs. As you are very aware, there are entrepreneurs who, during this COVID, they actually were able to even scale and grow in a way they haven't grown before. And some of those entrepreneurs were needing like this one-on-one consulting services for them to be able to manage the scale. And if you've diversified your structure to allow that, then it gave you room to quickly think about ways that you can continue supporting this, providing these individualized services as you're thinking about how to transition your cohort-based model into the new normal. And lastly, regarding diversification, and I think this has been touched a little bit by previous previous panelists, like for example, Dr. Mungai, when he talked about panel partnerships. It was very important for a lot of our members to chains and look at what are some of the vulnerability points and how can they bring corporates on board to help them be able to, and not just corporates, many other partners, to help them address those vulnerabilities. So for example, if you are an accelerator and incubator and you're offering a virtual program, in some markets like Uganda, internet is pretty pricey, and for you to expect the entrepreneurs to still pay for your program and still have access to the internet to participate in your program, this became a challenge. And for example, intermediaries that would come together and have conversations with some of the corporates that provide internet, as a way of them, instead of them providing like the challenge funds that they've been giving to the ecosystem, providing a subsidized data bundle to actually come and help subsidize the cost of the program. That came in handy. And this is just one of those where you can pick, say, internet, but there are many other pieces that you could just go through your value chain as a program, look at the vulnerability points, and think about how you can bring in on board a partner that you can give them value, and they can also draw value from your program, and in the process, entrepreneurs get to benefit from what you're doing. The second piece that the second lesson that we learned was the importance of investing in assets. And I'm not talking about assets like, for example, having like a machinery that you could dispose of, because this you could have, but COVID was not the best time for you to come and dispose of things. So one of the assets that we really saw work for our members, and these are not just our members, but even some of the entrepreneurs that within the programs they support were, for example, affiliations to the right networks. I remember one of our members that ran a program in Uganda. For them, for example, they work with entrepreneurs in the agribusiness space, and a lot of the entrepreneurs are actually involved in export. When we got into a place where travel was stopped and there were all these cargo planes that were expensive, a lot of entrepreneurs' operations were halted. And I know some of the entrepreneurs that were part of the Green Council of Uganda. Actually, what happened is that a lot of the development financial institutions were channeling funds through some of these associations. And what happened is that some of these entrepreneurs would actually get the Green Council to buy their product and then go ahead and, for example, for grains, sell them to government so that it will be provided as relief. And in that sense, then it allows the business to continue with their operations. And over and beyond even things like networks, we saw the importance of, as an intermediary, maintaining a very good relationship with some of the alumni that participate in your program. Because even as you move into consulting opportunities, if it's something that you haven't done before, we saw them leveraging some alumni, some of the entrepreneurs that had gone through the accelerator or incubator programs as the initial point of, as the initial customers to partake these services as they continue spreading the word and bringing more people on board. And finally, something that has been largely touched by Dr. Mungai is around leadership. This is one of those times that we saw some of those intrinsic aspects of leaders, but also others that can be built. If you see a lot of leaders that were able to adapt, they are very agile, they had empathy, and probably they are very purpose driven. And I know some of those things are intrinsic, but there are other resilient attributes of leadership that can also be calculated in a person through a lot of leadership development programs. And for us, not only did we see that depending on how you are as a leader, you are able to step into this new crisis, lead your team through this really turbulent time, but over and beyond that, we saw best practices around some of the partners within the Andy network that were coming back and starting to provide coaching support services to leaders. So Andy, for example, myself, and Wangeshi were privileged to participate in some of the leadership programs that are being offered by partners like Small Foundation to ensure entities that usually do network development within the ecosystem actually are able to form this peer support group where they can learn from each other and they can start preparing ways in which, like, they can start thinking through what are some of the strategies that we need to have in place in case we have similar disasters in future. And finally, again, this just speaks to leadership. We saw leaders that already like stepped up, built some of this like COVID response or disaster response within their groups and within their companies, and they were listening to these groups and in some entities, these are groups that are continuing even as we're starting to move more towards rebuilding the ecosystem after COVID. And we are hoping that as we hopefully get over the COVID period, we are going to see organizations now actively having some of these groups and actively starting working towards, you know, preparing or imagining our scenarios and thinking through what would happen if we, what are some of our vulnerability points and what do we need to do as companies in case the next disaster hits us? Because you said the next disaster could be a cyber issue. Now that all of us are doing a lot of our work virtually, could be a climate issue. We don't know. The only thing that we can do is to prepare as much as we need to. So at this point in time, I want to pass it back. I know I have gone for a long time, but thank you for the opportunity, and over to you, Modoni.
Thank you so much, Katuchi, and thank you for your patience. Ladies and gentlemen, we are very well beyond our expected program time. We are 14 minutes beyond, and because we are conscious of time and we want to manage your time properly as well, we are going to unfortunately skip the segment of the outcome poll as well as the audience dialogue. However, we do have then an opportunity in the Ask the Expert session that is scheduled for Wednesday, 3rd of February, to tackle those two parts of our dialogue today that we were not able to touch on. As I had earlier mentioned, our final segment is the Ask the Expert session. Our colleagues in IIA will come back to us with the actual timing and the logistics around how that session is going to be run. We are going to quickly go into the closing session, and really today's dialogue has been truly enriching. Really a call to action for solid partnership. We have had it from almost all the speakers who spoke about the need for solid partnership, the need for innovation. And our government representative from the Ministry of Trade, Stephen Odua, could not have come in at a better time, because indeed the government has a lead role, and we are all rallying behind as partners to make sure that they do move forward in supporting SMEs to be resilient. So this, my closing call before I hand over to Wangeshi is to really continue this conversation. Join us in growing this partnership that is geared towards a risk-informed SME sector. We will then have, of course, the third and final session of the dialogue series, which is scheduled for 24th of February, on enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response to build back better in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. And again, our colleagues in IIA will be able to circulate information about registration and all other logistical arrangements. It has been such a pleasure. We all live in a risk society, and we are called to action. So without further ado, over to Wangeshi for the closing sector. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much, Muthoni. Mine is to close with just a few remarks. I know that our time is really far gone. We are way beyond. And I first of all just want to acknowledge the fact that we have experienced a real issue today, totally unexpected. And I keep wondering as I reflect that this is exactly what we are discussing. You know, how can we invest more in disaster risk, because we are living with it, and the reality of the world that we are in has just come home with technology. And first of all, I want to thank everybody, from the panelists to the participants, for the faith that you have showed. The fact that we actually went off air for quite a while. And when we got back, I just realized that we were about 60 people back into the meeting. Really, for us, is a show of confidence and the high levels of interest and commitment in moving forward with this conversation. So first of all, on behalf of Invest in Africa, I really would like to apologize for the Zoom crash that just occurred. And really, it was unexpected. But the fact that we were able to bounce back and just continue and focus on what is most important really has given us the faith that we can still have another dialogue, and we'll be looking into all that. So I want to really thank, first of all, our moderator, Muthoni, who has done a fantastic job today in just holding this together and keeping us all engaged. This is really great, Muthoni, for just the resilience that you have demonstrated through and through what has happened today is quite encouraging. Again, I want to really thank our partner, our coordination partner, Strathmore University Business School, for coming together and supporting Invest in Africa in such a big way. Indeed, when we started this journey, we were just as IIA, but we reached out to several partners. We reached out to Strathmore, and they were willing to, help us, work with us, refine this, and have given their commitment to go the journey or to walk the journey with us even ahead. And they have really contributed to enriching this dialogue series in the planning and given of their resources. So we have benefited from the support of Strathmore, and this also gives us another opportunity to showcase how partnerships can really work. I want to thank all our other collaborators, and particularly the role of Andy in helping us with the advocacy, Kenya Private Sector Alliance, who also stepped in to help us with the dissemination. And I know that they'll be still playing a very critical role in communicating the post, dialogue actions and everything else that emerges out of this. We really thank you. Now, to our distinguished panelists, you've done us really, really proud today. The conversations from the speakers, from Dr. Jenga, the the Executive Dean of Strathmore University. We want to thank Jacob of DFC. We want to thank Stephen Odua from the Ministry of Industrialization, Trade and Enterprise Development. As you know, we cannot have a conversation like this without engaging the public sector and involving this ministry, particularly in the area of policy. We have learned, and I just put out my comment right there, that I am now learning how committed the government really is, and how the ministry is refocusing its efforts towards this same subject in addressing the issue of resilience and SMEs, which means that we can even partner more strongly with the ministry, because we are getting into that place of alignment and looking at solutions and how we can rally this along. I want to really thank Katuchi also for sharing knowledge from a network facilitator perspective and the work that you're doing at Andy. Thank you very much, Dr. Mongai. I know he had to step out, he was catching a flight. And also for James, who was unable to sit in through the session because of the challenges of time. Now, to all the participants, we had lots of SMEs joining, development partners, we've got members of the civil society and others. We really thank you for showing up. So, like Muthoni has stated, we would like to work with you and engage you and involve you in taking this conversation forward. So first and foremost, I just want to emphasize the dates that have been announced. We have a forum next week, and we would like to take in your questions. I recognize that there were so many questions in the first session, and there are also a couple of other sessions. We are organizing an Ask the Expert session for next week on Wednesday, and we will be in touch. On the feedback form, just indicate whether you'd want to participate in that, because then you'll have an opportunity to engage with the experts, with Dr. Edward, with Katuchi, and every other person who you're interested in hearing more from. This is really for us. We want to build this and see how we can move forward with this conversation. And then we will be having the third dialogue series on February 24th, on the last week of the month of February, to cover the third session. Remember, we said that this is a series, and we'll be able to share the report of the outcome of this dialogue with all the participants, just to ensure that we are all abreast with where we really are. I want to finally thank the team at Strathmore that was involved in planning this, the core team at Strathmore, and the team at Invest in Africa, the staff of Invest in Africa, who have all demonstrated such commitment, attention to detail and support to see this event really what it was. So I just want to thank all of us. I know that our time is gone. We wish you all the best, and let's get together in supporting our SMEs in building back better.